Xenoblade Chronicles 2. This game has haunted me since the conception of my YouTube channel. If there is anything you might know me from, it's my infamous 2017 review of this title and how overtly critical I was of this game. As I openly proclaimed at the beginning of the video, Xenoblade Chronicles is my favorite game of all time. I had expectations of Xenoblade 2, and they weren't exactly met for me. Upon first glance, Xenoblade 2 just encapsulated everything I disliked about mainstream JRPG culture. Over-the-top character designs, needlessly expository writing, cringy jokes, and this constant and weird horniness that could put any issue of Playboy to shame. Now, I'll be the first to admit that my 2017 review was the byproduct of a lot of salt, and perhaps I wasn't being quite fair to the game, nor were all of my assessments completely valid. But I released that review nearly 3 years ago now, and a lot can happen in 3 years. Wounds heal, people grow, flames dim, and Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition comes into existence. With the release of Xenoblade Definitive Edition, a lot of that initial anger over what Xenoblade 2 was has evaporated, and as a result, I felt a desire to go back with a fresh perspective and attempt to try to appreciate the game for what it had offered. Maybe when I revisited it, it would surprise me and my mind would change. Now, before you get your pitchforks out, hear me out for a moment. This review will not be an outright bashing of Xenoblade 2 like my first review was. Again, I aim to be as fair and impartial as possible here. There are positive things I'll talk about today, just as there will be many criticisms too. But this impartiality is why, aside from the opening statement providing context, I will not mention Xenoblade 1 in any capacity when critiquing this game. This will be a completely self-isolated review of Xenoblade 2 with no comparison to the first game at all. I want to discuss this game as its own standalone experience without relying on my love for the first or any perceived bias, God I hate that word, to become a point of contention. The point of this review is a self-isolated discussion on the experience that Xenoblade 2 brings to the table. I don't want to start a flame war in my comments about what games are better and what one entry does better than the others. I want to instead start a substantive discussion on what can be appreciated, critiqued, and judged about Xenoblade 2. Keep in mind too that this video will likely be the last time I ever talk about Xenoblade Chronicles 2 again. This is my definitive review of this game, and after everything I wrote here, with how long you can see this video ended up being, I don't think I ever really want to talk about it again. 3 years later, and I can finally separate myself from the primal emotions of disappointment that I felt upon first playing Xenoblade 2. With the release of Xenoblade Definitive Edition, and time distancing me from the initial shock I felt, my mind has cleared. Perhaps a new look at the game would give me a fresh perspective. Without that dark cloud of anger forming above me, maybe I could see this game in a different light. And it's not like I hate anime or anime games either. Far from it. It's a common critique thrown around about Xenoblade 2 that it's too anime, but I think the anime style stuff can be done really well. The Persona series is one of my favorite game series ever, and that's the most anime type of video game ever released. JRPGs are my favorite game genre by far, and anime can be cool. I've watched Yu Yu Hakusho, I've watched Bleach, I fuck with Naruto, and Xenoblade 2 can easily be compared to something like Naruto. That's why I wanted to apologize for my first review. Any inaccuracies or unwillingness I may have had to really understand the game's plot was a result of that initial anger I had felt. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry if my review ever made anyone feel as dejected as I felt when I first played Xenoblade 2. It was never my intent. My intent was to vent. My intent was to air out frustrations of not getting the exact experience I had wanted. So whether you love Xenoblade 2 or hate it, just know that your opinions are valid, okay? You can have any reason to like or dislike something. That's the beauty of critical analysis. We can agree to disagree and move on. But I am not sorry for what is about to come. I'm not holding back. Everything I say in this review are my honest, unfiltered opinions on Xenoblade 2, and that's something I want to emphasize. These are my opinions. My opinions are not facts, and I'm not saying that you have to like or dislike anything. All I'm saying is for you to hear me out and maybe understand my points. I'm not pulling any punches. Whether you love or hate the game, I hope you're willing to listen. So let's do it. Let's talk about Xenoblade 2. Yeah, also, spoiler warning too. I think it's fairly obvious, but yeah, this video will be filled with spoilers, so please do not watch if you don't want to be spoiled about the game. I am asking you, once again, to please click away from the video if you do not want to be spoiled. First, the soundtrack and environment design are absolutely stellar. This game is loaded front to back with unforgettable music and beautiful locales and vistas. Areas like the Praetorium, paired with its choir-filled backtrack, radiate of mysticism and feel spacious. More Ardaine's area theme absolutely bops and is up there with some of the best songs I've heard in video games, and the score in general shared a wide array of emotions. Somber moments are matched with a heartbreaking score, and the team really outdid themselves in their ability to pair visual scenery and music together. I just love the beautiful color palettes of areas like Uriah and Gormott, and each of these locales really packs a sense of exploration and freedom in their art direction, even if some of these areas are rather linear. The art direction in this game is easily some of Monolith Soft's best work, and I commend them for creating a world that looks so unique in a genre that's oversaturated with fantasy worlds that all borrow the same motifs. Some of the visual storytelling elements here are pretty solid too, like when Pyra visibly reacts to hearing Vandam talk about a play featuring Adam, her former driver.
They're in the middle of a show. Well, you want to take a quick peek? The heroic adventures of Adam. Might be interesting.
Or when Nia reacts to the knowledge that Cole is a flesh eater.
A flesh eater.
In terms of the character expression and animation, this game is stellar too. The characters' huge anime-style eyes gives each of them a fantastic sense of palpable emotion, and it's easy to see why those who are drawn by visual storytelling are swayed into the game's narrative. It's hard to not feel the charm of these characters reacting to things on screen in some moments, and paired with the game's often goofy and comedic aesthetic, it's very heartwarming. Despite what I've said in the past, I actually do like a good amount of the characters in Xenoblade 2 as well. Nia is easily the highlight of the cast for me, showing gradual and genuine character progression as an agent of Torna who is hiding from her past as a flesh eater, to someone who decides she doesn't want to hide from who she really is anymore and faces her fears of being rejected by those close to her because of who she is. Her relationship to Rex, one where she slowly opens up to him throughout the story, feels natural and is subtle yet brilliantly woven into their relationship and her past. His innocence and altruism bounces off her initial cold and stoic behavior until she starts to warm up to his persona and it begins bleeding into hers. Pyra has a genuine struggle that I can sympathize with too. Essentially giving Rex half of her life force puts her into a situation where she initially uses him for her goal to go to Elysium so she can meet with the architect and end her life, but gradually grows a close bond to Rex to the point where her guilt of misleading him manifests itself into her outright admitting that all she'd ever do was bring him pain. Jin's story is also a tragic one. His nihilistic view of the world and hatred of humankind comes from the loss of the only person he ever cared for, his driver Laura, and her dying words to him that being forgotten would be a fate worse than death for her, leading him to becoming a flesh eater and depriving him of the one thing that he desires most, death. It's honestly brilliant. The note that his death ends on is somber, tragic, and ambiguous too. Not only is he unable to fulfill his promise to Laura about not forgetting her, but he makes it all the way to the World Tree only to question his real desire and face an untimely demise before even knowing what he truly wanted. And as much as it pains me to say it, Rex does have a lot of redeemable qualities as a protagonist too. His aforementioned innocence and kindheartedness, offset by his immaturity and naivete, make him an interesting foil to the numerous dour, edgy, or overly charismatic protagonists that fill way too many JRPGs. Despite his immaturity, he does show many elements of self-sufficiency, emotional maturity, and level-headedness even with his age. While I've made fun of Rex in the past, he does have a lot of moments that show his character as a kind-hearted and innocent young man who only wants to see the people around him thrive. The moment where he helps the orphan children who stole from him by giving them jobs as salvagers shows that he believes in second chances.
These brats! Are you saying we should make salvagers of them?
I think they show a lot of promise. They've got pretty quick fingers. Right? Come on, you know it makes sense. They're poor little orphans with nowhere to go. Are you really just gonna turn them away?
You sure know how to twist a guy's arm. All right, I'll do it.
And his choice to hand the bandits that were planning to attack Torgoth over to the authorities in the same mission shows his desire for peaceful resolution. This, paired with the fact that he lives a basic male power fantasy, being surrounded by adult women with huge tits all the time, makes it obvious to see why he's such a role model slash figurehead for many horny 15-year-old boys out there. Rex also goes through some deep character progression throughout the game as well, with his main one focusing on him finally taking responsibility for his actions, and he starts thinking before he rushes into situations situations. The way he reacts to the encounter with Malos with Vandam's death, where he charges headfirst, contrasted to his response in Chapter 7 when he sees Pyra's lifeless corpse on the ground and keeps a level head and composure, shows outright that he understood that throwing a tantrum after a tragedy doesn't do him any good. Rex might not be my favorite protagonist ever, but I won't say he's a bad one. Xenoblade 2 plays around with a lot of concepts that I appreciate too. The architect creating blades to try to keep humans in check, as he didn't want the humans he created to repeat the same mistakes he did, is definitely a unique approach to the humanity is bad subplot and philosophy that exists in this game. I like how Malos' character and desire to wipe out humanity is reflected in that too. Malos wishes to wipe out everything because of the influence that his driver Amalthus had over him. Amalthus seemingly hated all human life and deemed anything he saw fit to be worthless, essentially making him a false prophet and ironically encapsulating everything he claimed to hate about humankind. He showed himself to be a self-righteous monster who believed that his will was the will of God. Malos being fed all of Amalthus' desires, as well as hearing Jin's tragic tale, leads him to want nothing more than to destroy humankind, which, while a little on the nose, does make sense in context. I will also take responsibility and apologize for my unwillingness to really pay attention to some of the game's plot and lore when I initially decried it as inconsistent. While playing it now with a better understanding of the game's lore and a playthrough of Torna for more backstory under my belt, I was able to follow the game a lot better than I was in the past. I'm sorry about my confusion between Blade Eaters and Flesh Eaters. The fight choreography and animation in cutscenes is pretty good too. It's very anime-ish and the characters at least look cool while they do shit on screen, and the characters' facial animations and expressions are filled with emotion and definitely resonate. I just wish that the writing, lip syncing, and delivery were on par with that facial animation. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Xenoblade Chronicles 2 3 years later. Thanks for watching, guys. Join me next time where I talk about Xenoblade Chronicles X, the game that Nintendo obviously wants to forget about just as much as I want to forget about the last 4 years of the American presidency. See you guys in the next one. Alright, are they gone? Is it safe? Okay. So we're all mature adults here, right? We understand that not everyone agrees with us on the same topics, and sometimes people have different opinions on the internet, okay? Then let me tell you that my experience replaying Xenoblade 2 went from optimism to mild distaste to utter disdain by the end of the playthrough.
They had us the first half, I'm not gonna lie. They had us. We weren't defeated, but they had us.
Yes, there were things that I found redeemable and liked about Xenoblade 2, but sifting through the slosh of awful game mechanics, poor level design, and overall shoddy and inconsistent presentation for those redeeming qualities was not fun. I know the internet will hate me for saying this, but I did not walk away from Xenoblade 2 enjoying it this time around. And I just want to preface this rant with a statement, because I know how a lot of y'all are going to spin this. I read the comments in my problem with the Xenoblade community video. It was filled with the woke centrist Xenoblade fans who think that because they love everything about all of the games and the series, it makes them better fans than everyone else. First, good for you guys for finding something to like about every game in the series, but that's not how critical analysis works. I love critiquing games and having a healthy discussion around providing sound judgment and criticism behind the mediums I love. I love video games. I love the Xeno series, and I wouldn't be making this video if I didn't love the Xeno series. I would tear down and critique Xenoblade 1, my favorite game of all time, any day of the week, which is something I might actually do in a future video. Why? Because I love that game. And in order to improve the things we love, having discussions on what could make them better experiences for others and ourselves is how we better these things moving forward. Nothing is perfect, and sometimes being a fan of something means giving it tough love. So if you can't handle a little tough love of this big-tittied mecha anime JRPG, I suggest clicking away from this video right now. I don't even know where to begin, so let's just talk about the first thing I hated that followed me throughout the game. Yes, I'm talking about the tutorials. The tutorials in Xenoblade Chronicles 2 do not respect your time. They patronize you, they slow down the pacing of the game, they present themselves as text and information dumps that do nothing to keep you engaged in gameplay. The game constantly drip feeds you these basic tutorials, sometimes on things you already know about hours after you first do them. Some of these tutorials are absurd and just waste time. Like, I don't need to know how to control the camera, and if someone doesn't know how aggro works by the Dougal boss fight like 8 hours into the game, they're a lost cause. I get that the game has a lot of mechanics that the developers didn't want to overwhelm new players with right away, but I think think they overestimate the actual complexity of the title and underestimate the intelligence of their player base. Really, minus the blade driver combos, the gotcha blade system, and the topple launch slam system, this game really is not the most complex thing ever. It's not rocket science. Yet the tutorials make it out to be, and all they really served to do was confuse me by feeding me this superfluous and poorly worded information way too often. This definitely hampered my enjoyment revisiting Xenoblade 2, because numerous game mechanics were locked off for me for dozens of hours of gameplay. You don't get access to chain attacks until midway through Chapter 3. That's nearly 20 hours into the game if you're doing all the side quests and exploring. I didn't get a character who could launch until Addendum joined the party. Dude, one of the Chapter 8 boss fights is a tutorial fight for a mechanic you get at the beginning of the chapter. There's a fucking tutorial at the last chapter of the game that talks about a mechanic that could have been used like 20 hours earlier. Are you kidding me? Yet, despite the absolute deluge of tutorials, some mechanics like spike damage aren't even really discussed with the player too. And when a mechanic as vital as that is randomly implemented like 50 hours into the game on a story boss that fucks you if you don't know how to deal with it, then it results in many broken controllers thrown into walls. The only hint the game ever remotely gives you on the Chapter 5 boss fight doing spike damage are the two optional, almost hidden chests in the area right before it that give you spike resist 2 ox cores. Something that's very easy to miss, by the way. These chests are the first time you ever get spike resist ox cores, and they're pretty much the only time you ever need them. No tutorial, text blurb, or even a warning about these bosses' spike damage or the mechanic in general is just baffling, considering that up until this point, I and many others had just assumed that spike damage was not in the game. The Chapter 5 boss was a shit stain on this game for many, including me on my first playthrough, but this time around I was able to kill it by disengaging every blade that I couldn't equip the spike resist 2 ox cores on because the AI was stupid and wouldn't stay on the blades that had these equipped if they could do a blade combo with any other blade. So the game patronizes you with meaningless tutorials on basic shit you'll never need to know, but doesn't ever tell you a critical game mechanic later in the story. Plus, spike damage is never used in a story boss fight beyond this point again. Then what was the point of even implementing it if you weren't going to tell us about it and you weren't going to implement it later in any capacity after the fact? I'm sorry, it's just bad design. The thing that probably aggravated me the most in this revisit were the core crystals. The RNG gotcha system is just bad. The fact that I pulled 34 common blades from the 41 legendary core crystals I obtained in my playthrough is infuriating, but yet I somehow pulled 2 unique blades in a row from 2 rare crystals? Most people's rebuttals against the system aren't good either. The common argument I hear in defense of the core crystal RNG is that it would break the balance of the game if you got nothing but unique blades from legendary cores because there are monsters you can farm to get a ton of legendary core crystals easily. My response? Maybe Monolith Soft should have created a better system where the word legendary is really worth its salt. Maybe they should have made legendary core crystals harder to find and more valuable, instead of letting certain unique monsters just shit them out. Because who other than the hardcore Xenoblade 2 fan is going to know to farm specific monsters for a high chance of getting legendary core crystals? Most people who play the game normally will fight monsters once, explore and do some side quests, come across a core crystal that has the word legendary on it, get a common blade from it, and get pissed off. And when the game essentially forces you to play the gacha game and pull unique blades in order to get field skills to progress in the story, that's when this becomes a problem. Because otherwise the game will literally wall you, and you won't be able to progress unless you get lucky with gacha or you grind. That's some free-to-play bullshit, not something that should be put in a $60 JRPG. Now, this next point I'm going to make will likely stir some controversy, but Rex being 15 in this game is kind of a problem in terms of the weirdly mature and sexually tense situations he's often put into. Now, I want to preface this by saying, no, Xenoblade 2 fans aren't pedophiles, nor does this game outright promote pedophilia. I get that age of consent laws are different in Japan, and there's a whole nother discussion to be brewed about how pervy adult Japanese men depict young kids in fictional media overall. That's not the discussion here today, though. But this game does tread a thin line and really shows how little was really done to make the localization of the game more culturally palatable for Western audiences. There are numerous images of sexualization of minors, or those perceived to be minors, and it's unsettling. Many of the blades are sexualized and look young. For example, Poppy looks like a child, is constantly alluded to being in her infancy, and you get an upskirt shot of her acquiring her QT transformation, which the name of the transformation alone is a big red flag.
Stop it! Stop! What the fuck?
You have these optional blades like Electra, whose awakening cutscene has her crying like a toddler, but her blade quest has her give a massage to an adult. Then some of these blade designs are just... yikes. And then there's Rex being 15.
They've started boozing below decks. You should join them.
Why aren't you there?
Rex talks about drinking? He's 15. He even says later on to the architect that when he meets Mallows, he'll have a drink with him, but immediately says right after that he's too young to drink.
And if you succeed?
I'll punch him in his stupid face, and then... probably get a drink with him or something. Not old enough to drink yet, though.
Then there's this idea of a sort of polyamorous romance between Rex, Pyra, and Mithra, and considering that he's a 15-year-old boy surrounded by adult women who put him in these sexually promiscuous situations, I'll just say the word grooming and move on. The Western version is localized in a way that makes it seem like they're more motherly figures to Rex, but the visual imagery and script writing scenarios are definitely a product of the environment of Japanese culture. It's just really creepy, and I know a lot of Xenoblade 2 fans don't like it when people talk about this, but it genuinely made me feel uncomfortable when I played this game, and it really hampered my enjoyment of the title. I'm sorry. I know someone's going to use my aforementioned love of the Persona series as a kind of docking point against my argument here, because the Persona series is notably known for depictions of minors in a lot of different situations, some of them being sexualized, but here is where I think context really matters, right? In many of the Persona games, the sexualization of the main characters is used as a point of character growth, and it's used as a point of representation of their characters, you know? In Persona 5, when Kamoshida, the teacher, is hitting on a 16-year-old girl, or is trying to blackmail his underage students into performing sexual acts with him, it's a reflection of his character, it's meant to represent themes, and it's something that is kind of supposed to be commentary. You know, context matters. It's not that the game is just giving me some peep show. They're trying to present characters and a narrative to me. There are, of course, outliers. There are examples of Persona just kind of being really pervy and weird, and I'll be honest with you, that makes me feel uncomfortable too. I'm not afraid to mention that. Again, I think that goes into a larger issue about how Japanese culture kind of depicts minors in fictional media, but yeah. It's just creepy, and I know a lot of Xenoblade 2 fans don't like it when people talk about this, but it genuinely made me feel uncomfortable when I played this game, and it really hampered my enjoyment of the title. I'm sorry. Next is the voice acting and writing. I thought I might have been exaggerating when I remembered Xenoblade 2's English VA and localization being bad, but I was wrong. It is worse than how I remembered.
So believe me, I won't let the world burn a second time. So, Pyra, Mithra, join me!
What do you mean?
Thinking.
We'll find your place in this world. Chairman, Banner, Chairman, Banner, Chairman, Banner.
Then I can feast on mushy mushrooms for life!
Chairman, Banner.
Indeed, 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 indeed.
The writing in this game is more tasteless than people who like pineapple on pizza.
You may have awesome regenerative powers.
Excellent.
There are just so many moments in this story where characters say and do things that are in no service to the plot or building the complexities of their characters, and when we do get these moments that actually make them nuanced, it's for a brief glimpse of time and it's never actually built upon. Honestly, I understand that a lot of the rebuttals toward my arguments about the story will be claims that, well, all of our main characters are complex and have all these character arcs. Look at Morag, who struggles with the fact that she should have taken the throne but is instead just a military general, or Zeke, who realized that his entire lineage or royalty was a lie, and that his family was nothing but usurpers, or Tora and Poppy, who struggle with being an imitation of real drivers and blades. And yes, all of these things sound good on a list where you provide zero context on how these things are implemented in the story, but the reality is that these character struggles are all brought up like once in the story for 5 minutes and are maybe slightly alluded to later on, but really played no significant role in anything that's in the plot, nor does the game really ever provide closure on these characters at the end. Yet at the same time, all these characters do for most of their dialogue is become these cartoonish parodies of anime tropes that have nothing to do with these complex aspects of their characters. Instead of using Tora's struggle with self-identity and desire to live up to his father as a main point of growth in reflection in his character, Tora spends most of his time on his con shit, just being a pervy yet innocent looking anthropomorphic character trope.
Dings. Yes, definitely Granby Bond's fault.
Are you sure, Tora?
Yes! Granby Bond! Yes!
Zeke's character development would be worth a damn if he weren't just the comic relief character most of the time.
Zeke von Gembu, bringer of chaos! Mostly known as Zeke, and often addressed as the Zekenator!
And anytime you leave Mora Ardain, Morak's character is just forgotten about, and any significance she has to the plot is just forgotten about. Akos, Petroka, and Mikhail spend the entire first half of the game being Team Rocket.
Prepare for trouble!
Make it double.
And by the time they do try to build these characters and give them backstories, it's in flashbacks right at the end of the game, just as they're about to die. Again, it's not that these characters aren't given complexities or deep struggles and arcs, it's about how poorly they're implemented into the story. I know what I'm about to say is going to get a ton of hate too, but the perfect example of this for me is Mithra. I just don't like Mithra as a character. Make no mistake, I'm not saying that Mithra is a bad character or has a bad character arc. When you put it all on paper, her tale of losing Adam, dealing with the world hating her for the destruction of Torna and her self-loathing, and desire to have the architect kill her when she saw all the destruction she could cause, it's all tragic. My hatred of Mithra has little to do with her actual development and how complex of a character she is. I just don't like her in terms of her personality, what she does, and how she's portrayed in the game. She's constantly portrayed as this tsundere anime trope. It does nothing to help her actual redeeming character qualities, and it's so corny.
Get out! Interloper! Monster!
Wait a minute, would you? Ow! You're the one in my room. The guy's room, see?
Huh? Be gone, fuck!
When your main character reminds me of Helga from Hey Arnold, it's hard for me to find respect for them. I get that she's like this foil to the meek and quiet Pyra. It doesn't mean I have to like her though. Her personality outside of tragic moments consists of calling Rex an idiot, putting him in these awkward, sexually tense situations, giving him this shrug off, bitchy, cold shoulder, and just yelling at him and everyone else.
If you hadn't been so useless, none of this would have happened. But you just had to push yourself, idiot. Look where it's got us now.
Surprised to see you.
You'd rather I was her?
I didn't mean it like that. I'd like to learn more about you, too.
What's that supposed to mean? Shut up!
A perfect example of this is when our characters land in Moritha and Mithra is lying on Rex's lap, which does offer good visual symbolism of the inverse of the intro where Rex wakes up in Pyra's lap. The game immediately ruins this good moment of just showing us what's happening by having Rex explain the obvious, what I just explained to you, and then him and Mithra start talking about how she snores in her sleep, which I don't understand what significance this has toward anything that's going on in the story, nor do I think it's fitting considering the tragic events that just transpired. On that note, characters will just go completely off the rails, sometimes at even really serious moments, just to say something horny or awkward.
Ira? Come on in, the water's great. Wait, Mithra? Huh?
Is there a problem?
I guess not, but... Nice bod you've got there.
Penis-kun is in confusion.
Like this moment with Mikhail when Mithra attacks him in chapter 4.
She's beautiful.
Wait, why would Mikhail say that as if this was some kind of revelation? Didn't he travel with Mithra in Torna? Whatever. There's also this moment in Chapter 8 when our group is climbing the world tree and Rex and Tora open up a conversation by talking about Rex's wallet and finances.
Maybe Rex lost wallet?
It's not that.
Oh, I see. Well, maybe your worry is your wallet's empty.
Well, that's true. I don't work much these days.
It's like people only do things because they get paid. And that's just really sad.
I guess this is supposed to be some transition into talking about Amalthus, but this is not how people talk to each other. When you have the threat of the destruction of the world looming over you, you shouldn't be talking about paying taxes. And it's not like this dialogue has any significance to it other than the awkward transition it provides. I know someone's gonna bring up this scene with Nia where she calls Tora out for his less than serious questions and how it might have to do with his character and innocence or something.
His tummy started rumbling.
Oh, Father. Every time with you, it's, have you lost your wallet? Or are you hungry? Is that really all you can think of?
But this type of dialogue writing, no matter how you spin it, it's just not natural. These aren't how people talk to each other, especially in times of turmoil.
Console Dougal, sir.
What?
I'm not exactly sure what colour emerald is supposed to be.
What the fuck is wrong with you?
Xenoblade 2 really tries to be this weird mesh of drama and comedy, and it doesn't know when to switch up its storytelling modes and motifs. The writing in this game literally goes from mourning over Vandom to putting the cast in sexually tense and weird situations that are supposed to be comic relief, but it doesn't feel deserved or fitting. It's just an awkward whiplash of emotion. You have to build toward comic relief moments like this. You can't just jump from one tone to another. You have to have tonal consistency and present your dramatic plot to us in a way that allows us to respect and empathize with your characters. This game is just filled with bad or cringy jokes at the most inopportune times, and I just don't vibe with it.
Poppy?
How may I be of service, Master?
Here we go. Nice one. Different lap.
I know my snob is showing, but the amount of times this game does the vapid character responds to what someone tells them by just repeating what they say in shock anime trope is quite literally every 5 minutes. Rex's one personality trait is repeating what someone else said 5 seconds ago, and it's in almost all of the cutscenes.
Just now, when we came into contact.
Just now?
Stabbed through the heart by Jin.
Jin? Through the... Huh?
It hasn't stopped. Not in all these years.
Hasn't stopped?
Can you take me to Elysium?
Elysium?
As the driver of the Aegis.
The driver? Of the Aegis?
Made himself the Aegis' driver!
The Aegis' driver? We seem to have washed up on a Titan of some kind.
A Titan?
After that, I'm afraid you're on your own.
Oh, on our own?
But you know, they're still my crew.
Your crew?
Looks exactly like the wanted poster.
What wanted poster?
Lady, Bridget.
Bridget?
In your company is an enemy of the state, a member of Torna.
Nia? A member of Torna?
Wait, Rex.
Rex?
An artificial blade.
An artificial blade?
Well, no more than 60,000 gold.
60,000?
Okay, all finished.
It's really complete.
Oh, forget you see that. Tora must change the settings.
The settings?
Was in the belly of the beast.
The beastie's belly?
Something is flickering over there.
Flickering?
If you can do that, then you're a true driver, kid.
A true driver?
That thing from before took me 5 years to learn that.
5 years?
Kind of awkward, right?
What was awkward?
Maybe you should go and make it right.
Make it right?
The man who was once my driver.
Your driver?
Of the cursed ones. A flesh eater.
A flesh eater?
Pyra, she's a different self that I constructed.
A different self?
But then you woke me up.
Woke you up?
That an esteemed Nopon merchant is involved in this affair.
An esteemed Nopon merchant?
Then a new rock would be born into this world.
A new rock?
Vanham told you. Core crystals don't die, they always regenerate after a while.
Regenerate?
He was your old driver.
My old driver? I wanted you to meet them, though.
To meet them?
You remind me of her. Just a tad.
Of Rex's mother.
I've been waiting here for 3 whole days already.
3 days?
Our most powerful driver. And its crown prince.
Crown Prince of Tantal.
Now you, who fought alongside us to defeat Malos, now standing by his side.
Jin fought against him.
He was the strongest blade in Torna, until it fell in the war.
A blade?
Put away your sword. My ability is to restrict a blade's every action.
Wait, restricting Blade's powers? Special envoy? To Tantor? Me?
Him is acquiescing to the Praetor's will.
Acquiescing?
A world-famous band of gourmet chefs, fire dragons!
World famous?
Gourmet chefs.
Sorry! We really did think they were here to murder someone.
Murder?
Distract the others.
Distract?
It's essentially one giant stasis web.
Stasis web.
So what?
So what?
It's just...
Just what?
To absolute zero.
Oh, absolute zero.
Rex. You and you.
Me? And Pyra and Mithra?
Maybe Jin feels the same way as us.
The same way as us? For the sake of the world, abandon us!
Abandon you?
I'll deal with it. Deal with it?
I think you get it. The reason that this bugs the shit out of me is how openly repetitive it is, and how little it really adds to the character's personality, the plot, the writing, or anything. Sometimes Rex just stands there like an idiot, repeating what someone just told him, so the game feels the need to justify its drawn-out exposition of things that are obvious to anyone with 2 working brain cells. Sometimes the game does it because they want to add emphasis or create the illusion of surprise, but sometimes Rex just reacts like this to the most banal shit for no reason. Rex going, huh? What? Oh, after any little thing that surprises him. It's just bad writing. Rex responding to everything that's slightly out of the ordinary by repeating what was said in a surprised tone is not a personality trait, it is just bad writing. At the end of the day, it's just narrative fluff. Nothing more than needless dialogue that any decent copy editor would catch and berate a writer for trying to do. And this is exemplary of the majority of what Xenoblade 2's characters say and do. A bulk of their interactions in the main story are just them explaining what's happening around them.
Blades come in all shapes and sizes. Some human-shaped, some not.
Some people say the shape depends on the kind of person the driver is.
Nah. The crystals start glowing again after a bit of time. Then a new driver can resonate with it. But...
There's a but?
Its memory will be totally zapped. It'll be reborn as a new blade. Won't remember a thing.
It's not character building, nor is it really substantive or charming. This game is filled with horrible writing. Like, villains will explain their whole evil plot or ideas with no context as to why they decide to tell us.
Let's see you use your precious arts when you can't draw ether from the atmosphere.
Even blades have weaknesses. This is one such weakness.
The villains are just so cartoonishly evil, each one essentially being parodies of the villain tropes that they represent. Like when Akos and Malos just spout exposition about their plans during Mithra's awakening.
It's Jin's desire to erase all of humankind from the world.
What? Did Jim seriously say that? Erase all of humankind?
My. Surely you knew better than anyone. You know what humans are really like.
Mia! What are you doing?
You've seen the capital. You've seen the ships, weapons, soldiers, all poised to invade Morardain.
Or Mithra, who explains all of her powers to Rex in a matter of like 3 minutes.
Pyra! You're...
I am not Pyra.
Huh?
I am Mithra. Pyra, she's a different self that I constructed.
A different self?
No time for that. It's called foresight.
I don't...
A prediction of what will happen in the immediate future. Read their movements to find an opening, then counter.
I get it.
The same thing I said about character portrayals here can also be attributed to how this game presents its world building too. I get that there's this extensive lore and universe with warring factions and multiple titans and a fantasy sci-fi world, but the way the game feeds you some of this information about the world is just so trite. Characters will literally put the story on halt, sometimes in the most inopportune moments to spout exposition about how ether or blades work.
While battling, drivers and blades both draw power from ether. But fire not good with water.
It just kills the pacing of the game when you're in the middle of some big climactic action scene and Akos or Mithra are going off about how this one specific ability works, while time just magically stops around them so they can spend 4 minutes explaining what's happening directly in front of you.
What? You see, blades draw their power from atmospheric ether energy. They send their power to the crystal where it manifests. But what if we were to interrupt the flow?
Shit!
The constant needless exposition from the characters is one thing, but it's also doubled up on the game showing us these things that it also goes out of its way to explain. I get that blades need drivers and drivers need blades in some symbiotic relationship. I don't need the characters to tell me that 20 times. The key to making a good story is being able to convey information in a way that is easily palatable to the audience, while only leaving key information in as to not alienate or bore the audience with superfluous facts. Like, imagine if while Darth Vader was force choking a bitch in the first Star Wars movie, he just goes off on a rant explaining how force choking works in the context of the Star Wars canon. It'd be stupid, because we already see what force choking does. He doesn't need to explain it.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
There's no faster way to bore me in a story than stopping the entire plot so we can take it slow and explain everything to the guy who wasn't paying attention, especially when the game could be spending that time giving these characters bonds and personalities. Actually, you know what these are? These are tutorials. These are tutorials in the cutscenes. Yet, despite this, just like with the tutorials, some things that could honestly use some more context and explanation just don't have that. Like, Rex has an entire change of wardrobe in Chapter 7 with Numa's awakening, and it's boiled down to these 3 awkward lines between the two, and then no one ever mentions his drastic change in wardrobe again.
What's this?
That's better, don't you think?
I could get used to this.
Like, what's the significance of this armor? Why did Numa give it to Rex? Where did it come from? And at this point too, the game mentions that Rex becomes a master driver and can use any blade in combat, but it's never brought up once in the story. That's despite Amalthus claiming that he is a master driver who can use any blade for his own will a few hours later. There's also a lot of unexplained phenomena surrounding much of the game's lore, and I want to discuss that too. Now, maybe I'm missing something with a few of these complaints, but my argument is that I shouldn't be missing anything here. The fact that I've played through this game extensively twice, I'm familiar with the rules and lore, and I'm still confused about certain aspects of the game's world should be a testament to how confusing and poorly told it all is. I shouldn't have to resort to a wiki or a random side quest where a character gives one line to help explain something that happened 20 hours ago. That is bad storytelling. I want to preface this by saying these are things and stories I genuinely care about. How well can you keep me immersed in your world without doing or saying something that will have me question the possibility of what's happening and take me out of the experience? The first question I have revolves around flesh eaters and their depiction throughout Xenoblade 2. Some flesh eaters apparently age, which is considered the drawback of becoming one, but some do not. Yet the game never really explains why some don't, despite it only happening to really one key player. For example, Jin became a flesh eater just like Cole did, and around the same time that Cole did. So why isn't Jin old as shit like the other flesh eater? Is it because he straight up ate Laura's heart, or do they not want to try to explain why Jin would be over 500 years old but still possess the same power and dexterity that he did in Torna? But Nia is a flesh eater, and she will likely age like other flesh eaters despite just outright eating the heart of her driver's daughter, right? So it can't be the method of flesh eating that results in Jin not aging, can it? And why does Jin have these debilitations in his powers but Nia doesn't? I just don't understand why they would introduce this idea that blades start to age when they become flesh eaters, but they don't actually play around with that concept in its main characters. Nor do they keep it consistent among all of them. They probably made the general rule that all flesh eaters had to be mortal, purely so that characters like Akos, Jin, and Petroka could actually die and be dead at the end of the game. While I'm nitpicking this game's continuity, I just want to talk about Blades and Reawakening for 1 minute. Just hear me out. So, when a blade is bonded with a new driver, they lose all of their memories, right? It's essentially the equivalent of them being reborn, as Bridget mentions. Why is it that when a blade reawakens, they instantly know how to perform special moves? How is it that when Rock reawakens, for example, he's able to remember his own name, but when Fan reawoke, she has a complete name change from when she was known as Haze in Torna? How is it that when blades awaken, they know how to speak, or they instantly know how the bonds between them and drivers work? If I was reborn out of nowhere every couple of decades, I'd probably freak out and have more questions than answers, like, where am I? What year is it? Who was I before? Who's the president? Do we have universal healthcare yet? Yet every blade, as soon as they reawaken, acts subservient to their driver and understands and remembers some things, but not things that are inconvenient to the narrative the game wants to spin. Like, honestly, I'm curious as to what the cognitive anatomy of blades is. What parts of their brains store memories of their past lives, and what parts retain the basic knowledge they need to survive? Stuff like languages, survival instincts, abilities, names, their roles. I'd like to know what the reawakening process really looks like and how blades originated from the start. It's obvious that blades didn't enter infancy when bonding with new drivers, but was there ever an instance where a blade was born into some sort of infant state? What was the first blade like, and how did it handle understanding its own origin and role? There are just so many questions I have about this game's lore and functions. I want to know more about Allrest and potentially get answers to lingering questions about the fantasy nature of the world, but the game never offers that. The game just kind of wants you to grin and bear it and treat any blade as if they were as dispensable as Pokemon cards. But at the same time, with the overlaying plot of Jin hating how blades are servants to drivers, they also want you to view blades as people with emotions. I get that suspension of disbelief exists too, guys, but even when something wacky or over the top happens in any good form of media, they find some way to explain it to the audience that allows them to just take it at face value. There are too many instances where Xenoblade 2 says one thing about its world and characters and does another, and it's honestly infuriating.
Some people say the shape depends on the kind of person the driver is.
What is said here is important. They say that the shape a blade takes depends on the driver that awakens it, but we later learn that any driver can connect to any blade that has been previously awakened, and said blade will still retain its previous form. On that note, the game's take on the whole blade and driver connection being vital shit is kinda moot when you can get any blade because of gacha. If a random fuck with potential can just pick up any blade, then what Nia said about there being some special link between blades and drivers is just BS, and the game made up a rule and didn't follow through with it. I really don't get how this level of ludonarrative dissonance exists in this game, when it sets up these rules and ideas in its world, and these rules still somehow aren't reflected in its gameplay. This is what I meant in my previous review when I said that the game just sets up these rules and expectations and doesn't follow through with them later. It fumbles in its continuity and its messaging of there being some deep bond between blades and drivers, and it's completely contradicted by the game's gacha system, where Rex just bonds with core crystals like he's a dude opening Yu-Gi-Oh card packs.
Woo! Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for. That's what it's all about. Woo!
And I know I spent a lot of time complaining about this one thing, and it might seem like I'm nitpicking, but this is something I really do pay attention to. I love to write, I love to read and engage with well-written stories. A well-written story means that a story is easier for the consumer to follow and the writers to keep up with. Like, I still hold firm that Vandam and Akos were woefully underrepresented in this game. Rex asks Cole to make a play about Vandam right after his death, and it never happens. No one ever brings it up again.
I was wondering if you could write a play about Vandam.
About Vandam?
Yeah. I think his story could inspire a lot of people. Once I find Elysium, I'll come see you again. Show it to me then?
An interesting notion. Perhaps that is the least I can do. Very well. I'll do it. So see you make it back here in one piece. Understand?
Absolutely. You have my word.
It's like Monolith Soft forgot his character existed and didn't provide him closure. Akos visibly reacts to his blade dying, and then never mentions her again. But like 7 chapters in, they hastily throw together this subplot of him and Petroka being related, and suddenly make that the focus of his character despite him not mentioning anything about his sister at the beginning of the game. I genuinely believe that Monolith Soft bit off way more than they could chew with this story. It's so hastily woven together with a ton of loose ends, and the way that the narrative flows with its tone, pacing, and character building, it's just... If you want the main example of everything I despise about this game, More Ardain is really where the game starts taking a nosedive. Not only is it where some of this game's worst lines come out, like the one with the hot springs scene.
Nice bod you've got there.
But the plot takes a complete backseat to the Tora Lila backstory, which has nothing to do with Rex's journey to Elysium, and it just feels like anime filler. It should have been a side mission, but I assume they wanted you to get access to the Poppy form. The game runs like hot garbage here too. The frame rate drops below 20 FPS constantly, and the resolution is just stuck at this sludge-like level. And plus, this is where I had to shut off the battle voices too.
Much obliged. Everyone's getting zapped.
Don't forget!
Don't forget!
Take
that! Take
The voices in this game get absolutely unbearable, whereas it should be used to help you tactically understand what moves your partners use so you can respond accordingly. Hearing the Moradane enemy soldiers scream, "Don't forget me, think you can take me," every 2 seconds, and having everyone just talk over each other is insufferable. Between the characters making grunting noises, shouting out the names of their moves, and enemies just not shutting the fuck up, you can't even make out what's being said at this point. Remember when I said that this game locking progression behind field skills was bad? More Ardain is the first instance where it actually becomes fuck field skills. So there's this mission where you have to pilfer some barrels for materials to hunt down Lila, Poppy's artificial blade sister. In order to decipher some of the Nopon text in the barrels, you need to have level 3 Nopon wisdom. There are only 2 ways to be able to properly pilfer this. You either have to get lucky and come across 1 or 2 of the rare blades to get the Nopon wisdom ability. If you get only 1, you'll walk around and talk to random Nopon to get Poppy's Nopon wisdom to level 2. If you fail to get a blade that comes with Nopon wisdom because gacha and shitty core crystal RNG, your alternative is to wait 30 minutes for your mercenary group to perform a mission for it. The game actually progression gates you if you aren't lucky with its in-game gacha blade system. This is the type of stuff I'd expect out of a free-to-play gacha game like Genshin Impact. But in Xenoblade 2, a fully priced game where all of these gacha mechanics in the game are free, plus they do the same shit in Chapter 7, 8, and 9. Progression gating on this level, it's just poor game design. This is the type of shit that should be saved for optional items and secret areas. While we're on the topic of poor game design, let's talk about the game's awful waypoint system. So in Xenoblade 2, the waypoint for any mission will only tell you where your final destination is, not the paths to get there. This is something that doesn't seem problematic at first glance, but when the destination is in a completely different area from where you need to start, like in this exact same Moradane mission, it results in me walking around the completely incorrect area assuming that my path is nearby the destination, when in reality I have to climb down a labyrinth, go down a specific path that's never outlined, and use that path to appear in another area where my destination is. This led me to walking around an area aimlessly until I would eventually find where I needed to go in order to find the abandoned factory in Moradane, an area that you're given no hints to or direction on how to access. By the way, the only path to get to the abandoned factory is filled with level 80 monsters in a confined space that you have to pass and will likely one-shot you. that's just not good. They do this awful navigation shit in other areas too, like this one area in Tantal where there's this visible gap caused by the destruction of a bridge. I assumed, because it was the case for everything up until this point, that perhaps there was a field skill nearby that I had to use, but there wasn't. So I walked around aimlessly for an hour until I figured out the game wanted you to solve this BS puzzle that it threw in out of nowhere with no context. You had to specifically break the ice surface above a giant pillar of ice in order to unlock a basic prompt for the pillar that created a bridge for you to cross. Keep in mind that the game does nothing like this before or after in any puzzle that requires you to interact with the environment, and there is no context clue or hint that would lead you to assume to interact with the environment in this way. This is bad game design. Then there's a spot in chapter 9 where you have to get a key code to unlock an elevator in the world tree. At first I thought the key code was attached to this horrible optional boss, the Mark 6 Margot, that would just randomly summon these mob enemies in a fight that would taunt my party into aggroing them. I just hated this thing, honestly. I don't know how they wanted you to fight it, but it sucked anyway. It turns out that the key code was actually on the wall by an inconspicuous tile that quite literally looked like every other tile on the wall. Some signal or a bit of context would have helped areas like this. This is not puzzle solving. This is asking players to look for a needle in a haystack. It's like asking me to look for a redeemable quality of Mass Effect Andromeda. Yeah, I went there. Getting back to my rant on Moradane, in this section of the game, you meet up with Zeke for the second time, and this is where one of the game's worst jokes happen.
What? You've got a lot of nerve, you one-eyed monster.
Nia, you do know one-eyed monster usually means...
Huh? Means what?
It's, Mithra, why are you blushing?
Shut up!
Ladies and gentlemen, I think my brain just committed suicide.
This joke personally makes me cringe, but what makes it horrible for me is that immediately following this, we're supposed to feel sad because of this emotional reunion that Tora has with his father. But the emotional whiplash of going from a dick joke to a main character meeting with his long-lost parent completely takes me out of the moment. That's not the only thing that just takes away from the seriousness of this entire plotline. Any bit of solemnity that this Lila subplot is supposed to make me feel is completely offset by the atrocious voice acting, the overly expository and one-dimensional writing where every villain describes their master plan for no reason, and each character has to narrate what's happening in the most hackneyed way possible.
That artificial blade uses lost ether furnace designed by Professor Susu. That is why.
You quite right. Even I could never make such incredible furnace as my own dad upon.
So you lured us out here to avoid making a ruckus in the city, is that it?
Quite right, yes.
Mui Mui was part of group plotting to steal artificial blades all along. While he, my Dadapon's assistant, he sell information to contact in guild and had them attack laboratory.
Then there's the fact that the character design and delivery here is the complete opposite of dignifying. This entire subplot revolves around a lolly robot dressed up as a maid, a race of people whose signature MO is to go meh and speak in the third person, and villains so cartoonishly evil that the game literally makes fun of them right in front of us. I'm sorry, but it's hard for me to take this seriously, despite the game obviously wanting me to. And then we get into the gameplay segment of this mission, and oh my god, so after you fight Lila for the first time, Tora leaves your party for a short while, leaving just Rex and Nia in the party. You're forced to fight a small gauntlet of monsters around this time, and it's brutally unfair. At this point, I had formed a crutch around having a basic 3-team structure. 1 tank, 1 damage dealer, 1 healer. Standard JRPG stuff. Now that one of those characters is gone and we only have 2 people to fight at once, the party's damage output was lowered significantly, and we would get overwhelmed constantly, and I died so many times just attempting to get past some of these Turkins. After that segment, we're subject to yet another moment of emotional whiplash, where Lila's death, a moment that the game wants us to feel a sense of poignant, tragic loss over, is sandwiched between a fight with a giant bobble-headed chibi maid robot and a transformation sequence in which Poppy turns into a maid with a full upskirt shot of her panties to boot. like, I just can't, man. I just don't understand what this game is trying to do, right? It's not that I hate that the game is wacky or has these absurd and nonsensical moments throughout its story. When done right, these things can be refreshing and fun diversions from serious emotional stories. Not every story needs to be serious. My problem is that this game not only makes these stupid jokes, but also tries to take itself way too seriously at the same time. It's trying to have its cake and eat it too. This shit is like watching a clown perform Shakespeare.
Lila's master pawn is Professor Susu, and Professor Tartazo.
And you can't do that. You can't just go from making dick jokes and doing upskirt shots to having perceived emotionally heavy character death, and then immediately go back to making dick jokes and doing upskirt shots again. That's not how storytelling works. You have to earn these serious moments and give us time to breathe. You have to give us reasons and time to respect and empathize with your characters before you indulge in these attempts at humor. Doing otherwise just makes me cringe, and it makes me feel embarrassed to play this game. All of this is bookended by the game's first major spike in difficulty with the fight against Mikhail and Petroka. I still don't know how to properly combat their BS where they trap you in a fire pit, launch your entire party in the air, and kill everyone. Even the tanks. Truly a cherry on top of what is arguably the worst area of the game by far. I managed to beat it after the 5th attempt, but I didn't do anything differently. They just only did the attack that nearly one-shot my team one time late in the fight instead of 2. I just managed to jump into an expository rant about one area I heavily disliked about this game. I can't believe I've gone this entire time in this review without talking about one of the major pillars of Xenoblade 2, its combat. Now, depending on who you talk to, combat is one of two things. The fanboys will tell you it's the best combat system ever, with so many complexities in its systems and layers of customization. The Xenoblade 2 detractors will tell you that the game's combat is too slow, confusing, and tedious. And then there's me, who's about to give you the hottest take of 2020. Xenoblade 2's combat is serviceable at its core, but it's also needlessly complicated for something that can be boiled down to a few key things. All you really need to keep in mind to make Xenoblade 2's combat work is vary your party's elements to get elemental bursts from blade combos, remember that pouch items exist, and perform basic driver combos from arts. The game will try to teach you a ton of different superfluous shit that does not impact your efficiency in combat aside from these key things. Yeah, there's stuff like auto attack canceling and art canceling, but none of that really matters when understanding the fundamentals will make the game a cakewalk. As long as you can get 3 to 4 elemental bursts on a boss, nearly all of the boss encounters can just be destroyed. Doing level 3 blade combos will summon an elemental orb on an enemy depending on the element that the level 3 combo is. Elemental orbs will lower your damage with that element as long as they're active, but breaking these orbs in a chain attack will not only deal massive damage, but will also extend the chain attack, allowing for even more damage. Couple this with the overkill experience system, which just exponentially multiplies the experience you get for dealing extra damage to an enemy after they die, and performing a good chain attack against a unique enemy or boss means you'll never have to grind for experience again. The one thing that gets me about this game's combat is that it gives this veneer or illusion of choice, when in reality there's little reason to ever vary up your gameplay from what are the best options available, regardless of context. For example, there's no reason to not use the dessert pouch items that reduce your arts cooldown, because they're the best pouch items by far. Arts will be your main source of damage, are the primary way you build chain attacks, and are the only way to perform blade combos, which help you get elemental bursts that you can use to extend chain attacks to deal tons of damage to enemies and get overkill experience. Certain characters are far better suited for specific weapon types too. This is because most of the characters just have better animation times and arts with these weapon types. Weapon types are directly linked to character classes. This means that certain drivers will be pigeonholed into performing certain character roles and using certain blades. Not all blades are created equally too. Some unique blades are just better than several others because they have better skills, stats, and blade arts. Not that it really matters for casual players, because most of you will be forced to use whatever blades the gacha system wills upon you. The only way to change which driver is bonded to a blade is to use an overdrive protocol too, and you have to jump over hoops to get those things to begin with. So, you know, you could get Cosmos, a really good blade with a 1% drop rate, just randomly assigned to Morag, who is horrible with Cosmos and all canon users without even trying. And if you don't have any overdrive protocols, you're fucked for several hours of gameplay until you're able to come across one or grind enough to get it. What makes good combat systems in games is options and choices based on the situations you're placed in. If an enemy is better suited for one weapon type or element, a good combat system should reward you for adapting and picking options based on what's best for the situation, not what's best purely because of stats and character compatibility. Okay, this has been a long review. I spent a lot of time tearing down this game and what I didn't like about it, but I really want to end off by saying this. If you love Xenoblade 2, good for you. You know what, maybe all the things I laid out in this review don't matter to you and you love the game anyway, and that's perfectly fine. But please, and this goes out to all Xenoblade fans out there, whether you like one game over the other, please, stop acting like your opinion is law. I'm not saying you can't have an opinion, and I'm not saying that all opinions are created equally. All I'm saying is that the inevitable toxic backlash that will be in the comments of this video for years to come will directly be a result of people not accepting that someone on the internet disagrees with them. And I'm sorry to burst any fanboy's bubble, but there's no such thing as a game, movie, or any form of media being objectively better than something else. These things all depend on what the individual values as an experience. You don't say one type of food is objectively better than another, because everyone has different taste buds, and some people are just allergic to certain types of food. So you know what, maybe I'm allergic to Xenoblade 2. If you know anything about how I review games, you also know that I don't use number scores in my reviews. I think numbers are a horrible way to oversimplify discussion and really take away from the actual critiques and substantive messages of a review. Plus, numbers mean specific things to certain people and are only ever really good in context. To some people, a 7 out of 10 is good, to others it's average, so giving a numbered score wouldn't be doing any service to my actual opinion on the title. With that said, what do I think of Xenoblade Chronicles 2? Well, my experience was definitely bogged down by field skills, horrible pace-breaking tutorials, and the expository and cringeworthy writing. There were glimpses of fun and enjoyment that I had while playing Xenoblade 2. I loved the music, some of the environments looked amazing, and the good storytelling moments and characters did hit me where they could. But I still walked away from this game feeling that it represented nearly everything I hate in JRPG culture. For me, the bad definitely outweighed the good, and I just couldn't walk away liking this game. I'm sorry. So yeah, I'd give it like a 6 out of 10.
Delicious! I could eat this stuff forever! Here we go! Nothing funny. Dixon's lap. Ricks! Why are you running?
Why are you running? Why are you running?